Let me welcome you to the session on governance and inclusion levers. Perhaps, maybe I am biased, I think these are probably the most important ones, other than economic ones. And congratulations on selecting such a hot and important topic to spend, well, your morning today. You made the right choice and we will do our best to prove that. If we fail, I'm sure you will not hesitate to let us know about this. My name is Michał Rutkowski. I am Director for Human Development in the South Asia region of the World Bank, and I'm really honored to chair this session. I would like to start by sharing with you 2 or 3 observations on what I have heard during the conference so far on the issues of inclusion and governance, on those 2 levers. And this will be a very subjective, not really summary, but picking up on a few themes. As far as inclusion is concerned, what I do here in the conference is a lot of talk about targeting. In order to include, we need to target, because if we do not target, we exclude those who are most in need. That's how the logic goes. The targeting is a difficult concept because it applies to targeting the right age, focusing on 1,000 days, minus 9 plus 2. That's an example of targeting. But even more important is targeting on right people, on those who are poor and vulnerable. And in the case of nutrition, this really applies primarily to landless people, smallholders, and rural unemployed. And more focus on targeting on those groups and on the right period in time would bring more inclusion of those who are most in need. Perfect targeting is never possible. I have a friend who is a professor at the LSE who uses to tell a joke about targeting poverty. He asks a question, is perfect targeting possible? Can we target all the poor? And the answer typically is no. There are always errors of inclusion, errors of exclusion. He says not necessarily. There is one condition on which we can perfectly target poor people. If all red-headed people are poor, only red-headed people are poor, and there is no hair dyeing technology, henna, then there is perfect targeting possible. Unfortunately, in life, the situation is not as easy, but targeting is very important for inclusion. As far as the governance lever is concerned, what I hear during the conference so far is a lot of focus on multi-sectorality, how to make different sectors work together. And a few themes that dominate that particular arena are that it is really not enough to have broad sweeping plans. What is really essential is to have course of actions that are specific to every agency or to every sector. Think globally, act locally. What I hear also is how important it is to have champions, how important to have structures that go beyond existing structures in the government that they do day-to-day work. Typically those who do day-to-day work in themselves are not reformers. They are charged with something else. So it's important to have champions or cross-cutting office or ownership at the very high level. These are just a few themes which I'd like to mention to kick us off. There will be much more because we have a stellar panel around me of people who have thought much more than I have on the topic of governance and inclusion levers. And let me very briefly introduce the panelists who will speak 10 minutes each. The first panelist would be Robert Mwadime, who is the Senior Regional Nutrition Advisor in AED Nutrition Uganda Fanta 2 project. After him, the second speaker will be Harriet Friedman, who is Professor of Sociology, Geography and Planning at the University of Toronto in Canada. Then we ask Cheryl Jackson-Lewis, Senior Nutrition and Health Advisor in the Bureau for Food Security in the USAID. And finally, last but not least, Manoj Kumar, Chief Executive Officer of Nandi Foundation in India. As I said, each of panelists will have 10 minutes, and then we open the floor for discussion. I have to profusely apologize, but I will have to leave the session at 11:40 because of a high-level meeting at the British Embassy on scaling up nutrition. So I will leave for a good purposes. I will be still working on nutrition issues. And Robert Mwadime very, very kindly agreed at this point to take over chairing of the session. I am very grateful for that. And again, apologize for leaving you in perhaps hot moment of the session. With all this, without further ado, let's move to our first panelist, Robert Mwadime. Robert, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Are we there? Okay, so thank you very much. I was actually requested to just give my experience of working in the region on how and the levers that actually can be used to have the governance and inclusion parameters in what we've been discussing. I think it's very obvious to us, one, that there are roles of the government that the government cannot delegate to anybody else. So that is one thing, that the government, there is a role for us, those of us who are in the government, that actually we cannot delegate. We have a role to make policies and standards, the legislation, the legal framework that actually is needed for us to be able either to bring all these sectors together or to address the specific problems that we are after. In that role, we can share it with others, we can involve others, but those of us in the government, we know we cannot delegate it to the private sector if we have to address some of these issues we are discussing. The second role is to provide mechanisms for compliance and coordination. Because if people are to comply with the legislations and the regulations that we are talking about, and if we are to coordinate, then actually it is our role from a government perspective to do that. You know, when you're a boss, you can sometimes delegate, but you are still the boss. And if anything goes wrong, it still comes back to you. So I've gone for meetings like the one of today, and I'm told, please chair the meeting. And I quickly agree, but it is not my responsibility. If anything goes wrong, you still have to do it. And the same thing with the government. The same thing with the government. You can actually hire people to enforce a regulation. So we have seen where the government have contracted people to enforce a certain regulation, but it still comes back, the bag comes back still to the government. So I want to talk to those of us who come from the government, because those two roles are very key. The third role for the government is that all these things that we are talking, even the resources, actually, it is our obligation to eradicate poverty, remove disease and malnutrition, if there is any, to defend the rights of our people. It is still us. So actually the government has an obligation to raise the resources that are needed for that to happen. We can ask development partners, the private sector, the others who are there to contribute to it, but actually it is still our obligation. Now with those three introductions, I can come and start discussing then what are the levers to help the governance people. So number one that I have observed in the region is that there must be a deliberate political decision and a political commitment to make a difference in whatever issue you are doing. We have observed that where the government has made a deliberate political decision to eradicate hunger, they actually have followed up that obligation to do so. I've looked at 3 countries in Africa. I think you heard this morning the Minister for Agriculture in Rwanda, We have not heard about Malawi. I wish they were here to do so. And the other example is Botswana, where I know very well there was a deliberate political decision to eradicate hunger. And it has happened also in Brazil. You've heard about it. You've heard about it in other countries. But unless that comes out of the government, then you will, all of us at every other level, we shall be talking and pushing and trying to struggle to make things happen. But they will not happen with the same dedication as if the president of the country came out and said, we are eradicating hunger. We all know where we come from. Hierarchy is very important. When an old man talks, they have talked. When leaders talk and show that commitment, it normally happens. Second thing that I can say I have observed is where there is a common goal. I think that issue has come again and again. There must be a common goal. You know what we always make mistake, and I think we said this somewhere else, is that we never have a common goal. All of us, whenever we go to discuss, we go with solutions. I always see this. We come and say, oh, we need to do fortification. Another one, oh, we need to do breastfeeding. Oh, we need to do this. And I've always said, that is not the problem. The problem is not that foods are not fortified and the foods are not having the micronutrients. The problem is that there is malnutrition that has a consequence on development. And that should be the common goal. And then you'll see the different partners coming together. So there must also be a common goal that all of us are acting. And I think someone said this in the last session we had, that even if we act differently with a common goal, we shall be united. The third thing I think is what our leader said, and I think it has come out, is that for the leaders to be able to see the urgency with which we must act. Because one thing I've observed in all these countries that I work in is not that people and the leaders don't know nutrition and malnutrition and hunger is important to eradicate or deal with. I think because of other needs that are there, they don't see the urgency within which some of these things should be done. So for us to be able to do that in the communities where we work, I've observed that this issue of nutrition political champions is something that we must really pursue very seriously. Because most of us who are here today are actually middle level, that kind of a level of people. We can talk and talk, but unless we can sit in cabinet, unless we can sit in those parliamentary committees, unless we can play golf with those people who matter, we shall not penetrate into their hearts. So that's why we need these political champions, so that at least we can give them the tools, the knowledge, the skills that they need, bring them to these conferences where they are enlightened and brainwashed, and then when they go home, they have interest and the passion to do so. Now, one fear that I have is that in Africa specifically, and I think also in other countries, interest is created because people have vested interests also. Some of people who become champions is not because actually they have the passion for the problem. It's because they are seeing a vested interest. It's because they are seeing, oh, this time I'll be able to travel. Or maybe I might have a big car. Or maybe there will be money to furnish my office. Or because, now they're suspecting there is going to be money. And all of us flock in that direction. And I was giving someone a very good example in HIV. When HIV came, all the leaders were talking HIV. And every household knew the word PEPFAR, knew the words Global Fund, knew the word. It was anywhere you go, people knew these terms. All of a sudden, I've experienced something. It's like people now know there's no longer going to be money in HIV. And all of a sudden, to invite people in meetings on HIV is just all of a sudden becoming difficult. Now they know probably there's going to be money in agriculture and nutrition. You will get many advocates. You will get many champions. But we need champions who have got passion. People who actually have a passion to make a difference. The other thing, of course, I think we've talked, and I don't want to touch on it, is the coordination mechanism. But I don't want to touch on it. Now, the last thing that I want to touch on it is the issue of accountability. Because one thing is that when we've been in Uganda making the National Nutrition Action Plan. And there are all these indicators. But some of us have been calling for indicators of accountability. Because as I said, it is the responsibility of the government. What indicators and milestones are we going to measure the government's accountability? We need a structure that coordinates us. That should be an indicator with milestones of how to do it. We need people at the districts that are going to do some of these things, the capacity at that level. We need districts to put resources and to include indicators of nutrition. You know, those things don't require money, they require commitment. And so accountability and indicators for accountability are actually needed so that we can actually monitor, is the government doing their role? And sometimes I've said maybe development partners need to start entering a memorandum of understanding with the government. That you do this, we do this. You do A, B, C, D, we do this. You don't do A, B, C, D, we don't do this. Because I think our governments, we have to do things very differently. We have to do things very differently. And one method of accountability, and I've been asking people who would analyze DHS data, can we analyze this data by constituency? So that actually our members of parliament, we can call them accountable to the levels of malnutrition in their constituencies. So maybe even the way we do some of these things might help us to bring out accountability. Inclusion, to get even much to rush to this. Inclusion, again, I think for us to include the different people that we need to include, and here I'm not going to speak on donors, the private sector, or the NGOs. Let me talk about that person down there, that person we want to include who is actually affected the beneficiary. One, the goals we've set, are they also their goals? Do they understand those goals? Do they feel it is a society goals? Are we all making this a movement where everybody feels we are eradicating hunger? Because we need to make them feel this is also our goal, to eradicate hunger. Secondly, if we want to have them actually do that, what I've seen in most countries, we have to brand nutrition. We must have a language or a slogan or a color or a song that when they hear, they remember nutrition. Because people down there, nutrition is not one of their priorities. Whenever we ask them of priorities, nutrition is not one of them. So I've seen where they have set branding of that particular issue. Like say, no child goes hungry in this country. Where they say njaa marufuku in Kenya or Tanzania, that hunger is illegal. And everybody knows that and is said at all levels. It makes the issue even bigger. But let me say the other way to include them, I have to cut a few of them. I think those countries where we have killed cooperatives and farmer groups, I think we have to bring them back. I know sometimes we fear because they might turn being political. And we all fear the power of the communities coming back. But I think that is one forum where actually we can include people. It's by giving them a voice to bargain. And I want to say to bargain in what? I think we've been all talking about bringing prices down. But I asked someone yesterday, whose price are we bringing down? Is it the price for the urbanites, me and you, Prof. Kichafunda? Or is it the price of the goods that we are buying at community level for the farmer? In Uganda, a kilo of maize this season was costing 150 Uganda shillings per kilo. That translates to $70 per ton. My wife calculated for me and showed me actually if that woman was working 3 days a week and a number of months and so on, she would be earning less than what is the average wage of a laborer in the village. And she told me, if I was that woman, I would not grow maize. We want to keep the prices of the urbanites low at the expense and the sweat and the blood of someone in the village. For us to include them in these discussions, my saying is that we must give them a forum to be able to bargain what is rightfully theirs. I think I should stop there. Thank you very much.